Those pesky Stanford Cardinal are coming to Autzen Stadium on Saturday. What does Oregon need to do to get a comfortable victory? Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster and lifelong Oregon Ducks fan. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching this show. A huge thank you to everybody out there who has already done so. I appreciate it more than I could possibly communicate. Today's episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Download the free Underdog Fantasy, or rather sign up on underdogfantasy.com with the promo code Locked On and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's underdogfantasy.com. Had to bring on my guy Rian Winter at Sports Chat 503 on YouTube and on Twitter because we're talking about the Stanford Cardinal. And, you know, if there's anyone who has a full understanding of the history between these two teams. I'm not making any implications here, Ryan. Nothing whatsoever. This is not a subtle jab at how old you may or may not be. If there's anyone who understands the illustrious history between these two programs, it is you, my friend. And look, there's never a time to take Stanford lightly. And the best example of that is 2021, isn't it?
Yeah. Stanford's always good. They're always good, man. I'm not quite as old as knowing the Jim Plunkett days, but I have been around. I was in the Brad Muster era of the Stanford Cardinal. No, they're quality team, quality opponent. They can go and they can recruit in every high school in the country. I think that's pretty rare. I don't think there's many teams like that. They're kind of like Notre Dame in that fashion, where they take the best and brightest from every single school every single year, so they rarely make mistakes. They're always pretty solid. They usually have NFL talent on their team. This year, I'm not quite seeing the same Stanford as we've seen in the past. But yeah, Stanford's always good, man. It's always fun.
And it's always worrying, and I think 2021 has kind of reinforced that even as the Cardinal have fallen on tough times, as I've been talking about on the show this week, this is not the Stanford team of even 4 or 5 years ago. They are not as physical on defense. They're not as capable on defense. Last couple of years, teams have run all over them. Oregon should be in line for another productive running day. At least they better be. And I have no reason to believe that they won't be. They've struggled defending the pass. USC and Washington chucked it all over the field. One of those games was in Palo Alto. One of them was in Seattle. So I think there's an opportunity here for Oregon's offense to have a really explosive, well-balanced day. I think, Ryan, it could resemble the BYU game where BYU, we saw Oregon make some explosive passing plays. The long one in Troy Franklin, the sideline shot to Matavao, right? There were moments like that, but it was a rush first attack. And it wasn't like Washington State where you had to throw the ball because you were down a lot of points late. If Oregon's going to get a win, the likes of which the betting markets think that they might, they're a 17-point favorite right now. I struggle. I struggle with that. It's just tough, and I think that's part of
that action.
Yeah, Vegas does want us to take that action, but we're not fools, so we're not going to do that. But what do you think is the most important factor for Oregon's offense to be as productive as they're capable of being in this game?
I think you nailed it. I think it all starts with running game. I mean, this offensive line's been great. They've been keeping Bo clean all year, but it all starts with the running game. You got to be able to establish the run. Like you said, man, the Stanford team has not done very well against the run as of late. And that was really a signature of David Shaw's teams for years, that they were so physical up front and they were really at the point of attack, just as good as anybody else you would see in the conference. That's really slipped. I think also their skill guys on the outside, the defensive backs, the safeties. Historically, they used to put guys in the NFL there quite often. I just don't see that anymore with them right now. So it's a dangerous game. It's a late game, packed right after dark. All that weird stuff happens, but I have a really good feeling about this. I think the Ducks can roll in this one if they can get up early, start just running the ball, run on these guys. I don't think Stanford's going to be able to stop them. And I kind of agree with Vegas a little bit. I'm kind of thinking somewhere in the 40s to the 20s. I think Stanford might get some points on the board, but I'm really not impressed with Stanford's defense. I think Stanford's defense is going to get exploited in this game.
And with the way Oregon's offense has been playing, that's how I expect the offense to
Yeah,
perform, right? Like it is at the point, and you hit on it perfectly. This is not the Stanford team of old. And I think back to that game in 2011, where I think LaMichael ended up having a good day statistically, but he was bottled up, bottled up, bottled up, and then he broke a big run, and that created some lanes later. But for the most part, it was tough sledding on the ground. And then in the years that followed that, right? Think about when we upset him down in Palo Alto in 2015 with Vernon Adams.
yeah,
We ran the ball okay, but the biggest plays in that game were Vernon Adams taking shots down the field. In that game in 2011, Darren Thomas had a good day through the air. And if you didn't have that against Stanford, it used to be you weren't going to score, but it's not like that anymore. And it hasn't been. And, the last time Stanford beat an FBS Power 5 program was Oregon in that craziness of 2021, a game that the Ducks should have won. They played better. They were in a position to win. A couple coaching things here and there. Didn't have Joe Moorhead as the offensive coordinator as the season went on. I think that clearly played a factor because it came down to a few critical moments. And I think Joe Moorhead was really good in those critical moments, third down and fourth down, and executing when you needed to and such. But as I look at this Oregon offense that just went on the road at Washington State and showed what they're capable of, right? 37 points plus 7 from the defense against a stingy Cougars defense led by Jake Dickert, their head coach, who's done a really good job with that program since he became the interim last year and is now the full-time guy. This is a defense that is worse. And imagine that statement 10 years ago, Ryan.
totally.
Washington State's defense scares me way more than Stanford's. That is
Oh,
an insane thing. That's an impossibility 10 years ago, but now that is the reality, and that's part of the reason I expect Oregon to succeed in this game, because they were terrible in the red zone the first half last week, but they moved the ball the whole game. They had 624 yards of offense. I look at Stanford, I look at Washington State, and factor in that we're at home now. The Ducks should have, I think, at least 35 points and at least 500 yards of offense in this game.
I agree. I think they should put it all up on the board. I think Stanford's in a really tough spot just in the schedule. I think this is a week where Oregon gains a lot of momentum from that comeback win last week at Washington State. Stanford comes off of their game, and it's just like, another ho-hum performance sort of a situation. I mean, Stanford is just not there. They're just not there. And I thought at the beginning of the year, I kind of bought into it. I thought it was going to happen. I thought Stanford was going to be, at least climbing back to where they were kind of respectable again. I thought last year they had bottomed out. This year, I feel like when I look at the schedule, I don't see many wins. I mean, I watched every single play of that Washington game last week, and I was just so thoroughly unimpressed. I didn't get to see a lot of the USC game, but when I went back and looked at the highlights of it, it looked the same thing. It was just like they completely got dominated on every single part of the field. So I would love to see Oregon put up a similar number, somewhere in the 40s, somewhere in the 20s, just like what USC and Washington did. But going forward, I don't see many wins on this schedule for Stanford. I mean, maybe the Arizona State game. I think Cal's better. I mean, they have a tough run. They play Oregon State, Notre Dame. Then they play Arizona State. Then they got UCLA, Washington State, Utah, Cal. And then they end the year with BYU. I mean, I don't see many wins there. BYU is going to throttle this team at the end of the year. And this team is going to play the way that they play lately. I mean, they usually kind of end that year with the Notre Dame game. That's kind of their traditional thing. And they just get stomped. And then this year they're going to do it with BYU. And they're getting Notre Dame now, or in 2 weeks, when Notre Dame feels like they're kind of getting it back rolling again. So it's like, dude, Stanford is just like screwed on their schedule this year. They took the big loss from USC hot early. USC wanted to make a number on that one. Washington looks great. I don't know if Washington looks that good or if Stanford looked that bad, but either way, that Washington game, Washington looked fantastic. I think Oregon's going to look great this week as well. I think Oregon State's going to look great against them the next time. I mean, I just think that there's not many wins on the schedule. And you and I talked before the year, I thought this was going to be the Cal team. Now it ends up being the Stanford. I thought Stanford was going to go to a bowl this year. Now they might only win against Colgate nor Arizona State. They might go 2 wins or something. but they could rally. They could put it back together, but they're in tough shape. I mean, they lose their starting running back. They've had multiple guys on their offensive line down. They've got guys on the defense with injuries. I mean, watching the David Shaw press conference, I mean, he's next man up mentality for sure, and he doesn't give up anything on his facial expression, but you can tell he knows he's in for a very long season.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about what Oregon should be able to accomplish defensively in this game. I think there's a shred of light at the end of the tunnel for the Stanford offense. I'll tell you what that is after reminding you this episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to spice up college football this season. They've got a really easy to use format so that you can make money and watch your bets play out while watching your favorite team play. You could go and pick individual player props. You could pick Bo Nix over a certain number of passing yards, or you could pick Bucky Irving or Troy Franklin or anyone like that. And then you go make your picks and you watch the money, hopefully, roll in as you watch your team after you make all of your decisions there. Sign up with the promo code Locked On. That's one word. And Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. Deposit $100, get $100 free. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com or find the Underdog Fantasy app in the App Store or Google Play Store. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code Locked On, one word. Get in on the college football pick'em action today. So defensively, Ryan, the bad news for Stanford, or I guess defensively for Oregon, offensively for the Cardinal, they have this new offensive approach that is interesting. And coming into the year, I agree with you. I thought Stanford would be a better team. I thought they'd be improved because I thought they just fell down a little and David Shaw would get back to it. And it's not as if they don't have talent on their roster. Their 24/7 talent composite is, I think, like third highest in the Pac-12, third or fourth. Like they have plenty of guys there. They just seem to have lost their way from a coaching perspective. And I think David Shaw has been dealing with an identity crisis with this team. And that's why he's radically shifted what the offense looks like. And you're going to see this long mesh between Tanner McKee and Casey Filkins. Got to shout out Lake Oswego, my alma mater. He played football there. And he steps in now with EJ Smith, unfortunately done for the year. But the shred of light at the end of the tunnel for the Cardinal is what's doomed them, really, in these games against Washington as USC, is they're going into it as an underdog, and they're going into it as a team that doesn't have a lot of margin for error, and they're getting down into the red zone, and they are Oregon against Washington State, but in back-to-back games. I mean, they went down against Stanford. They threw an interception on the goal line. They had first and goal inside the 10, walk away with a turnover. They had another first and goal, walk away with a turnover. That was against USC. Then against Washington last week, they're down 7-0. They're driving. They're moving the football. And they get down there, and Filkins trips on the turf monster, coughs up the ball, it bounces off his body, and it's a Washington interception. Those have been the killers, but there have been times where the offense is able to move the ball. So does that give the Cardinal at least some hope against this Oregon defense?
Sure. And I think McKee's a good quarterback. I think they'll have open spots to work with. I mean, I think Oregon has not shown it's that stout of a defense through the middle, and I think that they'll take advantage of that. They've always got the great big wide receivers. They've always got good tight ends, and I think they'll take advantage. I think they'll move the ball. I just don't know if they're going to be able to score with the Ducks. I just think that Stanford right now, historic, like you said, there's an identity problem with David Shaw. David Shaw used to like to run the heavy package. He used to let everybody know what they were doing. You could just do it and just let's see mano a mano who's going to win this thing. And most of the time we're going to win those battles. Well, it feels like now they're not. I heard a thing this week in Portland here, an interesting kind of take where they said, what the success of Kyle Whittingham up in Utah has kind of taken maybe some of what David Shaw used to do. And same with Oregon State a little bit to that extent where, there's been guys who, historically maybe have, fit one mold and they go to a different program, they can do something different. Well, those two programs are both very physical. They use the tight end a lot. They'll run a heavy package. And now, hell, Oregon's running the heavy package. I mean, the same team that you thought would never go under center is now going under center and running the heavy package on a variety of yardage, not even just the short yardage goal line, with more than 5 yards. So I don't know. I think David Shaw did recruit very well last year, though. Their recruiting class was very good going into this year. So I tend to think he has a lot of rope, and I don't think Stanford's going to push any sort of emergency button. He's been there a long time. He'll be consistent with them. They love loyalty. He's one of them. And it's going to be very difficult for them to kind of get him out with the success that he's had in his career. Now, if he stacks up a couple of these really subpar seasons, there might be a little noise, but it's also a school that I don't think really cares that much about it. If they're good, they like it. But if it's not good, it doesn't really say anything about Stanford versus all these other schools where they really get their identity from how good their football team is or how good their sports team is. And we kind of live and die by that. Stanford doesn't. I mean, Stanford kind of really doesn't give a damn. It feels like half the time with the band and the mascot and everybody else, they're just kind of making fun of the whole thing that we care so much about. They're just like, ha, we're just out here to play around with you guys. They don't care. And I think that they're above it, on the elitist level, and they have the right to be. They are the cream of the crop, man. And it's all good. Go do your thing. But, it feels like, they don't really care. Look at the stadium. Every single time we go down there, it's more Ducks than Cardinals, basically. Unless they're top 10, they'll put seats in there. Otherwise, there's nobody even in the top. They barely fill that stadium. There's not much buzz there. So I don't think they really care when they're not that good. And right now, they're not that good, so they don't really care.
I think offensively for Stanford, one area where they might struggle against the Ducks is, though they have this new RPO long mesh concept that is designed to get the receivers in one-on-one situations, right? Suck up the linebackers, and if they stay back, then you give it off to the running back. But if not, you're going to have one-on-ones, and that's going to cause Christian Gonzalez, Triquez Bridges, Dante Manning, Jamal Hill, Bennett Williams, all these guys who are in man coverage on given positions, receivers, tight ends, or running backs, to be able to cover in space. And that's been the weakness of this Oregon defense outside of Gonzo so far, is winning a one-on-one with an opposing team's wide receiver. And they've got a couple of good ones. Michael Wilson is the best one, number 4. I forget his name. He's number 0, but he's not explosive with his speed, but he's got a big body, just like all those Stanford guys have had over the years. Urosic, the tight end, is a really good athlete. He's kind of like a poor man's George Kittle. They'll give him the ball on an end around, Brock Bowers style at Georgia, and he can really, really run and move. So they've got some weapons. The offensive line, though, is expected to be, I believe, without their 2 starting tackles. And that's going to be rough. Now, Oregon will be without DJ Johnson for the first half, but the Stanford offense, even though it has a different look, still wants to run the football, right? I mean, that's the foundation of what they're doing now. You still have to be able. I was wondering if you were going to see that little bug right in front of your face. But
I got the window open back here, Spence. You know what it is,
yeah. They still want to run the football, and Oregon the last couple of weeks hasn't let anybody do that. And if you're missing your 2 starting tackles against a team that the last 2 weeks against BYU and Washington State have run for fewer than 70 yards as a team, that could be a struggle for the Cardinal. And I think an area where Oregon can take advantage defensively, if the defensive line without DJ Johnson for a half can hold serve, and then you have Sewell and Flo out there just causing havoc, making plays.
Yeah, and I expect this to be a game where Oregon kind of steps up the defense early and often, and possibly taking a ball away or two. I mean, they've definitely given the ball up this year, and they've been, again, they're just disappointing on offense. When you put the film on, there's not a lot that like really sticks out. There's some playmakers here and there, but losing starting running back, losing some tackles. I mean, it's a rough situation for them going into an absolute lion's den of Autzen Stadium at 8:00 at night, the latest game ever at Autzen, in a time where people are really fired up about this team. Again, I think it could have gone one of 2 ways last week, Spence. It could have really gone one of 2 ways. Had you lost that game, you might be in maybe a little bit of a danger zone, because you would have come into this situation maybe with your head between your tail between your legs a little bit, head down a little bit, and instead you come in firing on all cylinders. You couldn't wait to get back to practice on Monday. You're juiced up through the whole week. So it really does something. And again, we talk about momentum all the time in game, but momentum during week to week to week is also something really important here. And I do think that Stanford just catches Oregon at a terrible time. How about if Stanford played Oregon State this week? How much better would have that been, right? Oregon State comes off of the USC loss. They're close, but they're fired up. Stanford comes off their terrible beatdown. They're fired up. Bring that together at the same time. Instead, Stanford's playing an uptick Oregon team while they're kind of downtrodden. It feels like it could be real dicey. I think Oregon's defense has really done a pretty good job up front. I think the transfers in the middle have done a great job. I think Casey
Yeah.
Rogers
Casey
done,
Rogers,
dude,
man, that guy is
solid.
so much better than I thought he was going to be. Not that I saw him
Me
come in
too.
and say, "Oh, he's not going to do anything. He won't play." I just thought like, he'll play. He'll see the field. I don't know if he'll do a lot. He's a disruptor.
And you just never know with transfer guys, right? You just never know. And I thought Jordan Riley's done a really good job. He's a big body guy. And then I thought Taki's done a pretty good job while he's been in there. But really, really been impressed with the transfer guys in the middle, because losing Popo was a big deal. Keon Ware-Hudson's played well. I think Dorless, probably is better still in the middle. I prefer him kind of more in the middle than I do outside a little bit. But either way, this is a team that has been stopping the run. They are stout up the middle. They might not put the amount of pressures or sacks that you'd want to see maybe on the quarterback, but they are running the ball. They are stopping the ball in the middle pretty good. So I like their chances against Stanford. The problem I see is that defensively, Stanford's going to take advantage of you at some point. They're going to put points on the board. They're going to score at some point, and they might score a couple, 3 times. But the idea is that if you can just slow them down enough, put them in long distance situations on third down, I don't think they're going to be able to get out of it. I think that you're going to put them in some negative yardage situations early and often, and they won't be able to dig their way out.
I think defensively for Oregon, the biggest question is how are they going to be able to cover in space? And
Right.
not that in any football game you could say, well, tackling in space is not going to matter. But the athletes that Stanford has, Wilson's got some good speed. Yurosic's got decent speed, but Casey Filkins at running back, who they're going to be relying on, is solid, but nothing special. The other guys they have, they're not going to absolutely kill you the way some other teams will, right? Like you watch Washington's receiving core, you go, those are some dudes. Those guys are fast. Those are explosive athletes. With Stanford, I feel like it's more about can Oregon just cover? Because this is not an offense that has been dynamic at getting their guys the ball in space. In Stanford this season, I'm talking about, they have been, running that long mesh, and Oregon, I'm sure will have to adjust to that, and there will be a little feeling out space, and I'm sure Tosh Lupoy and Dan Lanning will make adjustments as they did finally on the tunnel screens against Washington State, though I thought that took a little long, but growing pains for a new coaching staff and a first-time head coach. I expect all of that sort of stuff. But the areas where Oregon's been exploitable this year, the quick hitter passes and getting guys the ball in space. That's not what Stanford has really done so far. And I think that again sets up, I expect Stanford to get on the board a couple times. But Ryan, I again have high expectations for this Oregon team because that's the standard they've set so far. I watched that BYU game. That BYU offense, even without Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney, I think is more explosive overall. They've got a better quarterback. I think they had a better running back, better offensive line as well, healthier offensive line than what Stanford is bringing into this game. And so when I see what this team is capable of early in the season for a first-time head coach, I expect things to continue to progress. So when I see 7 points for BYU through 3 quarters, I look at Stanford and say they shouldn't have more than 14 to 17 through 3 quarters. That is where my expectations are for this game. And look, maybe I'm acting as a walking, talking, although I'm sitting right now, jinx for the Ducks and everything, setting these expectations. But I'm watching the other teams in the Pac-12. I've seen what Oregon's capable of, and that's what I expect. I expect them to be able to keep Stanford off the board relative to what the Cardinal want to do offensively, and offensively for the Ducks, they should be able to move the ball.
I totally agree. Yeah, I tend to think that this is a setup kind of like, I look at it through the lens of basketball sometimes, and it feels like, Stanford runs not a fast break offense, not even a half court offense. They run inbound plays. They're literally just running inbound play after inbound play after inbound play. And inbound plays are just intended to get the ball in. They're not really intended to move down the field or go down the court and get something up. They're not even creating offense. They're just literally getting someone open. And it feels like that's where Stanford has gone to. They've gone to you're right, the long mesh that draws everything out. I don't think it actually gives that many options. I think it actually lessens the options because guys are storming after you in that pocket. You have to make quick decisions there at the end. And I get it, what they're trying to do, but they're not really executing at that level. I have a good buddy here that I was talking to today. I really value his opinion. He's a very smart guy, especially with football. And he basically just said, hey, this team is a worse BYU. And the way he put that was just so simplified. He was like, dude, Oregon beat the hell out. And this guy's not even really a Duck fan. He's just a sports guy, you know? He's like, dude, Oregon beat the hell out of BYU. This team's worse than BYU. Like, why are you even worried? I was like, because it's Stanford. Blah, 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 blah. And he was like, dude, no. He's like, you guys should roll over this team. Because, again, he's in the same boat where he's like, he looks down the schedule. He says, this team might only win 2 or 3 games this year. So Oregon better beat them.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at. Like the spread's sitting around 17.
That might
If
be one
Oregon,
of the bigger spreads all year, Spence.
yeah, it could be. And with how Stanford has played, I understand why that's the case, and I expect Oregon to be able to win this game by 20 or more. Like if they win this game by 10, yeah, of course, getting the win at the end of the day is what is most important. But
Sure.
I won't have the most chipper tone on Monday's show coming on and talking about how Oregon, iced the game with a late field goal to win 30-20 or
Or
something
even
like
if they
that.
come back in garbage time and score, and you know what, like
Yeah,
Washington State did.
yeah. No, I expect to see a complete game from the Ducks here, even without DJ Johnson. So we're
Now,
in
now,
agreement. Yeah,
oh
go
yeah,
ahead.
real quick. The other thing is, I heard Lanning say something along the lines of he wanted to be up by 20 going into shout to let the guys
Yep,
dance.
yeah. I've heard something
So
about that. I don't know if it's
I
officially
don't know if it's official yet
confirmed.
either, but I heard that.
Yeah, I heard that same
I'd
kind
like
of
to get to
rumor.
20. I'd like to
Yeah,
see.
exactly. You want the players to be there and be able to shout with the crowd. And I know the kids want that too, because like, what's more fun than doing shout when you're a member of the Oregon football program?
Right.
Last thing, Ryan, mailbag question came in via the YouTube comments. And remember, Duck fans, you can always ask me questions at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. Twitter mentions, Twitter DMs, or you hop in the YouTube comments as Jacob N did. And this is a futuristic question, but I wanted to answer it because I think it's
I like the
a
future.
fascinating storyline to evaluate as the season goes on, because a lot of things can change between now and then. It's fun to talk about them. So, hey Spencer, random question, but not that random. If you had to bet on who our starting quarterback next season is, who would it be? Bo, Ty, Dante, or other?
I think Ty.
You think so? I don't know.
I think Bo's one and done.
I'm with you there. I am with you there. But
And then well, then I would say, okay, so if Bo leaves, then it's just the other two, or it's with Jay. And I think that Ty, reading Ty's body language on the sideline, seeing when he is kind of rooting on Bo and whatnot, I feel like he's sticking around, and I feel like he's going to get a shot next year, an honest shot. And I think with a couple years in the building, with the weights, with everything else, seeing a lot of football on the sideline, he's going to have a leg up on Dante Moore. Even though Dante's a great player, don't get me wrong, but I think that when you get to D1 and everybody gets kind of in the same room at the same place, I think the guys who've been there a little bit have a leg up, especially early. So if I was putting money on it, I'd say Ty.
I hear where you're coming from. If I had to put money on it, I would actually go with Dante, and here's why. This staff came in and Ty Thompson was on the roster, and I think we
True.
can all agree, based on what we've seen, and Butters was there too,
Good point.
that Ty is not ready right now to be a starting quarterback. He could be next year, right? Maybe he needs another offseason, get a few game reps in there, and then ultimately get that chance. He will have a season to his advantage, but the advantage that Dante Moore will have in the eyes of Kenny Dillingham is that that's the guy that Dillingham recruited.
True.
And so what I would lean towards right now, based on what I have seen, and that's that, Ty is a step below Bo. So if let's assume Bo is one and done, that's what it looks like, because Michael Penix lists himself at Washington as a junior when he could list himself as a senior. That's indicative of him wanting to return for another year in Seattle next season. I was talking about that on today's episode of Locked On Pac-12,
Sure.
and you can go check it out over there for any of you who might be interested. But Bo lists himself as a senior. He's got the sort of physical traits to find an NFL roster somewhere. I don't think he'd necessarily be an NFL quarterback, but he could be on a roster somewhere for sure. And 4 years of college is a pretty long time. So let's assume that happens, and he leaves, goes to the NFL, and then you have an open competition between those three. Ty has the advantage of having played college football at least a little bit already and having 1 year in the system, but recruiting and playing time is often about relationships. And I think we're seeing that with Oregon's running backs a little bit right now. Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington came in, and that staff has a loyalty to those guys, not to Byron Cardwell and Sean Dollars, who are playing less than some fans probably expected coming into the year. But Dante Moore, that's Kenny Dillingham's most prized recruit in his time as a coordinator anywhere at this point in time.
Sure.
And I wonder if he won't be anxious to get him on the field and start his development really, really quickly, the way that the previous staff was not wanting to do with Ty Thompson because they deemed him to not be ready. But the other thing, too, is I think Ty was, a highly rated prospect coming in for sure. But I don't think the word on him when he committed to Oregon was he's super refined. Dante Moore as a passer is a very refined quarterback prospect. And I think his ability to potentially come in and command and execute an offense right away could potentially be greater than that of Ty's when he got to campus.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that's a great point. And I just, if I were to put it, that the safe bet is it's going to be Ty's because that's where he's at, right?
Right.
In the point in time in his career. But no, you're right. I think that there's something to be said there, and I also think that there's something to be said that they're going to play whoever the best guy is. So let's see who this guy is, right? And if Dante comes in and he's obviously the guy, well, then I think you're going to see not only him play, but you're going to see Ty take off. So
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing is something's going to go down here next year, and it's going to be absolutely super fun to watch. I mean, I think that quarterback conversation's always a good conversation to have. It's always front and center on people's mind. It's always something that people have opinions on. Everybody loves the backup, that sort of thing. In this case, you're going to have a true freshman coming in here, playing against a guy who's going to be basically a junior. And I think that if your freshman's that good and he can beat out a junior that's been pretty good, or at least good enough to be able to be in the situation to be the backup, then that's really saying something about the freshman. So that's kind of
That's
what
true.
your point. If he's that good, we'll see. And then obviously it's all systems go. But I do feel like I'm a little more old school on that level, where I do think that the kids should come in and have a year to kind of feel the thing out, get to their classes, feel the whole thing out, hit the weight room mainly. Just get on a better nutrition plan, hit the weight room. A lot of these guys are eating McDonald's and stuff in high school. These guys hit the nutrition plan a little bit harder in college, and then just to see the game a little different, to hit the film room, to spend a lot of time studying stuff. And I do feel like sometimes there's an added extra pressure that you might not want to burden on a freshman with trying to carry the load of a huge program, being the face of the franchise on day one, where you can see how fast these Duck fans can turn on somebody, and if you go out and you kind of slip a little bit early, might be in a dangerous spot going forward. So I don't know. I love the recruiting. I love that people are passionate about it, but I feel like I'm a little more old school, and I kind of say, well, we'll get him in the uniform here. We'll see how he looks here at our practice with our guys, and then we'll make the decision.
Old school, wily veteran, experienced, well seasoned, all things to aptly describe my man Rian Winter at Sports Chat 503 on YouTube and on Twitter. Appreciate the insight as always. Looking forward to the game. Duck fans, you'll notice my Twitter account for Locked On Ducks will be oddly quiet during the Duck game after about 30 minutes or so. And that's because I will be on an airplane from Kentucky back to the state of Utah where I currently reside. So I really hope the Ducks get a comfortable win here. But at the same time, if it's a stressful win, I won't have to watch it live and you'll all get to suffer through it like we did last week. And then I can just see the end result and go back and watch it a little more peacefully. We'll see how it goes. But Ryan, it's great to talk to you as always. Looking forward to the game.
Thank you so much, Spence. Appreciate it, man. Love what you do on Locked On Pac-12 and Locked On Ducks. Thanks so much.
I appreciate the support. I appreciate all of you for listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and go Ducks.